Hello, my dears. I think that we have all heard about invisible disabilities at this point from somewhere, if not from me, an aggressively abled passing person. But since 70% of disabilities are not directly apparent, which we will talk about in a bit about how that's not totally true, you're just not paying attention, it is an important topic to discuss, especially as somebody with 30-ish different diagnoses who literally works as a disability advocate who is still not believed on a daily basis as being disabled. And like on one level, it means that I'm not discriminated against as much upon meeting me, but it also means that people refuse to give me accommodations and constantly accuse me of being a liar, even though I don't believe in lying. And also, I don't really get the medical care that I need. So like, you win some, you lose some. But when people say, well, obviously I'm not disabled, that's not obvious. So let's talk about some numbers. Like I said, 70% of disabilities are not directly apparent. So if 15% of the world's population is disabled, that is about 1 billion people, that's 10 to 11% of the world population, or 700,000 people who have invisible disabilities. In the US, 20 to 25% of the population is disabled, which means that 14 to 17% of the US population, or about 40,000 people, have invisible disabilities. And that's a lot of people. So, what kinds of disabilities are invisible ones? Well, the typical list includes diabetes, asthma, cystic fibrosis, brain injuries, severe allergies, epilepsy, chronic fatigue, chronic dizziness, heart conditions, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, lupus, EDS, mental illnesses, and being blind/low vision or deaf/hard of hearing, and so many more I haven't named here. And then we also have migraines and chronic pain, with chronic pain being the leading cause of disability globally. And there are a lot of misconceptions about chronic pain, so hopefully I can clear up some of those for you. Now, the first one is that chronic pain doesn't go away, ever. And sure, I can manage it and I can take measures to make it less bad if I do have flare-ups, but I will never be pain-free again. And frankly, I don't even know if my brain knows how to process not experiencing pain at this point. So if I look fine to you, like right now, or if you ask how I'm feeling and I don't mention that everything hurts, that does not mean that everything does not in fact hurt. It just means I'm trying to ignore it. I don't know if you're familiar with the typical pain scale with like no pain being 0 and hospitalization being 10. And that makes no sense because everybody has a different pain tolerance and level of where they're concerned and would go to the hospital. But anyway, if somebody wakes up one morning with the amount of pain that I consider to be low pain, they would probably go to the hospital terrified that they were dying of a stroke or something else. But that also does not mean that I am used to that pain or that it's not completely exhausting both physically and emotionally. Just because I have been in constant pain since the age of 9 does not mean that I am cool with it. It does not mean that I am fine. It just means that this is my new normal and I'd rather live a happy life in pain than not live a life in pain. And there's this idea that it's not possible to be in pain or be sick all the time and that you have to be healthy at some point. And I mean, look, I dress like this. I go to school and I go to work every day and I do a gazillion things at once. So I must be healthy at some point, right? No, it's just because I have absolutely no other choice. People with chronic pain are 4 times more likely to have depression and/or anxiety than people who are pain-free, and long-term it can impair working memory, long-term memory, concentration, and because it increases chronic stress, it can reduce your lifespan if the illness doesn't kill you itself. And we'll talk about the adventure of the medical system in a bit, but part of chronic illness that's really extra fun is facing your own mortality over and over, and for some people that makes them completely paralyzed and unable to do anything. And I do experience that sometimes too. Don't get me wrong, but my more recent scare made me realize what my values are and what I want to do and how I want to spend my remaining time and energy on this planet. And so, yes, I am in debilitating pain. All the time, but I'm gonna keep going to work because that's what I want to do with my time and that's what brings me joy. And going to school, well, I have no other choice. So that's less of a want to thing, but eventually it'll get me a job because it's a degree, I guess. But just because I live with this amount of pain, just because I am functional, just because I am a young person who seems like she shouldn't be experiencing pain, that does not mean that I've gotten used to it and that the pain doesn't get in my way all the time. It's just that I would personally rather live for a year as a happy person making a difference in the world rather than not doing anything and being depressed and living for 30 years. And obviously there are gradations between these two things, and I'm not going to deliberately eat something that I am allergic to because, like, yeah, happiness. Happiness is not more important than health, but I will push myself a little bit farther than I probably should just for the sake of enjoying life. Might I regret that later? Yeah, probably. And that's a line that I'm still not very good at finding, but I am getting better at. And this also means that if I say no, don't tell me to push myself, because I crossed that line a long time ago. I constantly tell other people to know their own limits and not be afraid to say no. But do I listen to my own advice? Nope, not really, because I hate being a killjoy even though I'm not, and I will torture myself and face the consequences just because I'm too scared to say no. But for real, joking aside, it is hard to set clear boundaries because every day is not like the last. I mean, yesterday I couldn't walk from one end of campus to the other, and today I'm practically running in circles. And I get how from the outside that is confusing, and how if tomorrow somebody I hung out with today asked me to go on a walk with them and I said no because I wasn't feeling up to it, that would feel kind of like I'm lying just to get out of doing something I don't want to do. And like, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I do use my disabilities to get out of things I don't want to do. But most of the time that is because I know that I have very limited energy every day, and things I don't want to do take up more energy than things I do want to do, and it's often not worth expending the energy I don't have. But in general, I also don't do that because I'm afraid of saying no to things, and it's a serious issue. So if I say no, if I say I can't do a thing, if I say that I'm in pain even, know that I really, really mean it. And I get that it's hard to believe us, and I know that it is, and it's hard to convince people of something that they can't see. I mean, so many people I know don't believe that I get dislocations because every time it happens, I giggle, maybe say a couple colorful words, and then I move on with my life. And that's not what they think a reaction to a dislocating hip should be, so they think that it's not real. And it's also a difficult line for the disabled person because on one level we feel a constant pressure to always be positive about it so that other people don't have to deal with the anxiety and all of these various gray areas and lack of control that comes along with chronic illness. Because, I mean, we're tolerated by society only when we seem to be able to manage both our conditions and our perceptions of our conditions. And that's exhausting. I'm also often told, well, hey, at least it's not cancer. And first of all, research has actually shown that many chronic illnesses and conditions and pains and all those things are not any less painful or debilitating than fatal ones. And also, I don't think you understand how horrible it is to be in never-ending pain. Not to mention that saying at least it's not cancer is really not cool because cancer is also not the worst thing in the world, and it's also not better or worse than any other disease. So please stop with that, please. Also, the strongest pain medications were created for cancer pain, and you cannot be on them for more than a very short period of time. And so those of us with the same amount of pain long term don't get those things. Like hip dislocations, I have to take ibuprofen for those, and that's my only option. Also, it's fairly common for people with chronic migraines to have micro strokes and have absolutely zero idea because migraines and strokes can feel and look identical. So no, it's not just a headache. I also might add that a huge part of having invisible disabilities is going to the doctors and having them go, I don't know what's wrong with you. Because if you have a major injury and they need to amputate your leg, that's kind of obvious. That's like oh, here's what happened. Here's how we handle it. Cool. Meanwhile, if you come into a doctor's office saying, my head hurts a lot and I'm really woozy all the time, they run a gazillion different tests and you try a gazillion different medications with a whole host of side effects. It's all very expensive, your insurance doesn't always cover everything, you're occasionally vaguely convinced that you have anywhere from like 2 weeks to 2 years to live, depending on what they tell you at each given visit. You have to cope with that, and then at the end of the day, you often don't even get a diagnosis and you just get sent off to another specialist for them to do the same cycle all over again. It's exhausting. And it's terrifying, and in the meantime, your symptoms are likely getting worse simply from exhaustion. There's also this idea in our society that people fake disabilities in order to get pain meds or medical notes to get out of things, but I cannot express how much that's not a thing, if it is very rarely a thing, because real disabled people don't get those meds or medical notes. So what makes you think that somebody faking it would? I once went to the doctor saying something seemed wrong with my digestion and I was pretty woozy all the time, so I was worried that I wasn't able to eat or something was wrong. And then when they weighed me and discovered that I dropped a lot of weight, they sat me down and yelled at me for 20 minutes accusing me of having an eating disorder. I've also gotten blood work and imaging done and then had those things come back normal and then been told that I shouldn't be experiencing the symptoms that I am experiencing because my labs didn't show anything abnormal, which is a thing. I've also had a neurologist tell me that my pupils weren't dilating and contracting the way that they were supposed to be if I were actually dizzy all the time, so it was just a psychological thing I needed to work on. I've also called my doctor asking for a note saying that I needed a parking space vaguely less than a mile away from my dorm because sometimes I have a hard time walking that far safely and I need to be able to get to my car. And before writing said note, she continuously told me that that sounded debilitating and horrifying and that I can't live a life that way and that I should really see somebody to do something about it. She's my doctor. That would in theory be her job. But whatever, it's fine. I've also been told by one doctor, oh, you should go to a neurologist first. And so then I went to the neurologist. And he said, you should get physical therapy first. So then he sent me there. And then he sent me somewhere else and I forget where I went. And then I went back to the first doctor. And a bunch of medical bills later, still no answers and absolutely no difference in my pain levels, other than having no free time because I have all these doctor's appointments. Now, when I stopped going to specialists and stopped trying a gazillion medications and instead decided to figure out how to live with my disabilities and manage them on my own, I was told that that's self-harm because I hadn't tried every solution yet, as if it's preferable to keep pretending that I'm not disabled and look for cures that don't exist with bad side effects rather than actually managing my pain in my own way. I've also been told by doctors that I don't need mobility aids, that I don't know what's going on because I don't have a medical degree, so why would I? They also don't see anything wrong, etc., etc., etc. And at this point, I just go to my primary care physician every year and she goes, hey Sydney, what's new with your disability stuff this year? And I tell her all about the new things I've figured out, what I've learned, what I've researched, how I'm handling them, how things are getting better. She says I'm doing a great job and then I go home and that's it. And honestly, I don't know which one of these options is preferable because either way they're not helpful and they don't really make me trust the medical system very much. And on one level, obviously this is infuriating and dehumanizing, but also ableism is everywhere. We know this. The issue here is that this is health stuff, i.e. this kind of ableism and ignorance kills people regularly, and that's kind of freaky. And we know that it's worse in minority groups. We've seen this with women and trans people and people of color, and how much more likely those people are to be ignored by the medical system and face the lifelong and life-ending consequences of that. And a large part of this comes from their medical training. A huge part of their training is purposeful exhaustion and overworking yourself. So to them, if you feel like poo and you're exhausted, you just pick yourself up and keep on going. That's not anything special or anything to be worried about. Also, they're usually taught about illnesses and disorders in very short time frames within the context of cis white men. So why would they understand that autism also looks like me, or that a black person could have Crohn's disease? Because that's not how they're trained and they haven't seen it before. And conditions like EDS and endometriosis are ones that they're told are super, super rare, so you'll never see them in practice, so they have a hard time actually believing that it's as common as it actually is, and not thinking that, maybe it's just been severely underdiagnosed in people before now. Wild! Now, speaking of wild, let's talk about how invisible disabilities aren't really invisible and most of the time you're just not paying enough attention. Now, if you go into every situation in your life, assuming that non-disability is the norm, you don't have the disability competence to notice the subtle ways that we signal our disabilities because you're just blatantly unaware of it. You can tell by a person's posture how often a person sits or leans in the way that they do that, the way they hold or adjust their body, the way they look at a room, how their energy and attention and moods ebb and flow, how communication patterns and styles vary, how even speech patterns can change based on pain levels. Even their outlook on life is different. It's all very obvious to other disabled people. Also, medical aids are so much more than just a cane or a wheelchair or service dog or ear defenders or shower chairs. They can be easy grip cutlery or stim toys or phones for reminders, communication, etc. A specific chair that's more comfortable for their back pain than another chair, smart home products, stuffed animals, blankets, socks, specific types of clothing, and so much more. And so I understand that it is scary to admit to yourself that there are people out there every day dealing with an amount of pain that's just completely unfathomable to you. And I find that a lot of people are afraid or uncomfortable around the disability community because we're kind of the only minority that you can just suddenly end up as one day against your own will. So it's easier to just deny that we exist and that it's not as prevalent as it truly is so that you don't have to face that reality. And it's even easier to deny the disabilities that you can't see. But what this means is that we don't get the care that we need, and our conditions don't get funding for research, and our accessibility needs aren't regularly met. So we end up suffering so much more than we need to. I'm often asked if I would want to be cured of my chronic pain. And while I will admit that it does sometimes feel unbearable, it has also given me a unique perspective on what it means to be a human being and to know what I truly want from life and what I want to leave in this world. And obviously, I would love to not feel like poop all the time, but also with the proper accommodations and supports, I really only have like 3 migraine debilitating pain days a month in comparison to my usual 10, or if I'm being thoroughly discriminated against, about 25. But as much as I sometimes hate having chronic illnesses, and I hate not being believed, and I hate being in pain all the time, It has made me who I am today, and I don't think that I would be doing what I do or looking at the world the way that I do if I hadn't had to come to terms with the fact that, like, if I fully relapsed to where I was spring 2020, I'm gone in 2 to 3 months. And that may sound scary, but for me, I'm very at peace with that knowledge because it reminds me that every moment that I live in this world matters. And it has also made me much more aware of my physical needs and makes me actually pay attention to them than I normally would without being disabled. And overall, my chronic pain has made me me. And overall, honestly, without migraines, I don't know who I would be because it has made me who I am. So don't be afraid of us. The invisibly disabled community is a very unique bunch of silly people that you would be absolutely lucky to get to know. It's also important to acknowledge that somebody can be disabled and also be able-bodied because a lot of mental illnesses and neurological differences can be disabling too. And that's why accessibility is not a one-size-fits-all thing. One of the biggest questions that I see disabled people asking themselves in the mirror is, am I disabled enough? Is this really disability? Does it count? I can't see it. And the answer is, if your life is being in some way hindered physically or psychologically or both by a thing, yeah, you are disabled enough. You deserve to use that single-user bathroom if you need to use it, and you deserve to use your mobility aids without shame, and you deserve to need accommodations. And now that I've been working as a service dog trainer, I've noticed the implicit biases people hold about invisible disabilities much more clearly, because I'm just as visibly, or not visibly, disabled with my own behavior, way of moving, and everything else as I am when I have a dog, but then when I have a dog next to me, everybody automatically becomes more accommodating, no matter what. Like, it's really bizarre, and it's really nice in a weird way. It's kind of a relaxation moment for me. But it's easier to be believed that there's some sort of external marker, and if you know somebody's disabled, you'll accommodate them. I mean, it makes sense. But now that we know that 70% of disabilities aren't super apparent from the outside, maybe it's time to shift your mindset and become more accommodating for everybody, because you never know who might be disabled and might benefit from these accommodations. And if they don't, well, accommodations don't really hinder anybody and often make life easier for everyone anyway, regardless of their ability or needs. So in conclusion, disabled people are everywhere. There could be one right behind you right now, maybe even on your screen. We are everywhere, whether you can see it or not, and you should be accommodating of all people. Believe people when they tell you that they're disabled and that they have needs. And if you're in the medical field, just try to be extra careful about your biases, because you have people's lives in your hands. Just a concept. But anyway, that's all for today. I hope that you learned a thing or several. If you want to stick around, feel free to subscribe, and I am happy to have you join my little corner of the internet. Also because I have 1.5 years of bloopers saved up for when I hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'm really excited about it, and I want you to see it, so we should make that happen soon. But also absolutely no pressure. And as always, except for all the times that I forget to do my outro, which is more than I would like to say, thank you for listening, thank you for learning. Remember, your story isn't over, it has only just begun. I'm getting really fidgety right now, and that's not usually an ending. But I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.